The core risk is that it doesn't achieve the overall goal. What's the overall goal? I think we know that the global semiconductor supply chain is both fragile and concentrated. While over just about 50% of chips are designed by American companies, only 12% of chips are manufactured in the United States, and 92% of the most advanced chips are manufactured in Taiwan, which gives both a unique dependence on the economic side, and from a national security perspective, it's deeply concerning with regard to potentially a crisis around Taiwan and the dependence on manufacturing in Taiwan. So the goal of a U.S. investment would be to essentially help in this strategic sector, help the company be successful, because having domestic U.S. manufacturing is so critical because of the range of uses of semiconductors, from defense and military to critical infrastructure, all the way through to connected toys our children play with.
And at the same time that we've seen the Trump administration discuss whether to buy a portion, in essence, of Intel, we've also seen them open the door, essentially, to NVIDIA to resume sales of some of its AI chips to China, and perhaps even sell a downgraded version of its more advanced Blackwell AI chip to Chinese customers. Is this a good idea? The Trump administration certainly thinks so in terms of disseminating the U.S. tech stack, but what are the risks embedded in that strategy?
As you know, both are core to the larger strategic tech competition the U.S. has with China, right? The goal of the first, an equity stake, would be to say the potential is to take the model that worked with the 2008 bailout of the auto industry, an equity stake tied to outcomes, restricted to a time period, again tied to those outcomes, and replacing the Biden administration approach, which was grants and loans, which the CEO of Intel said was taking too long and potentially has the risks of reducing the competitiveness of the company. So that's what's driving in terms of the broader U.S.-China tech competition and ensuring there's a sovereign capability for chips. On the high end, NVIDIA chips and AI is a strategic arena, both because of the application of AI for military and intelligence capabilities, as well as the broader economic competitiveness that we believe AI over time will drive across industries. So as a result, currently, the highest end U.S. chips manufactured for AI are manufactured in the U.S., and balancing providing them to China, or whether broader uptake of the U.S. AI stack would drive global development on U.S. chips, is the trade-off the Trump administration has been thinking about and making. A number of people criticize the decision to provide highest-end chips to China because of a concern it'll advance Chinese military capabilities. Certainly, the CEO of NVIDIA makes the case that it'll deepen global reliance on the U.S. tech stack for this critical new industries being built on AI.
We do want to bring in some breaking news headlines from the White House press secretary, who has now concluded her briefing at the White House. But as we're having this conversation, she was also having this conversation with reporters, commenting on this story on Intel, saying that the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, is currently ironing out the details of that deal. She said that it is a creative idea, in her words, as we try to glean some more details about what its structure is actually going to look like. And she adds that President Trump's interest in this really does have to do with reshoring manufacturing. To build on this conversation, and can you just give us a little bit more context here about the urgency that the U.S. is facing when it comes to competitiveness in this space, and how the White House is dealing with those different factors here to try to strike a balance between making sure that our producers or companies have enough time to move their supply chains, but also keeping up with this idea that we are in this race with China?
Absolutely. So the core issue is around manufacturing of advanced edge semiconductors, and that's where there is an urgency in changing Intel's course. Intel's facility foundry plant in Ohio has been delayed until 2030. So accelerating the time frame for foundry capability so there is a backup in the United States is key. With that said, chips are components used across industries. Companies have supply chains, so having more reliance and understanding of when chips will be available in the U.S., at what quantities, frankly, at what sizes, larger end, which are used in consumer products, all the way through the most refined, smaller semiconductors, which are used in high-end products. So really having a knowledge of helping Intel meet its timelines and tying potential equity stake to those timelines also would give greater assurance to the number of sectors relying on chips, because so much of manufacturing is still just in time and needs to rely on knowing when chips will come where.
And I wanted to pivot a little bit to the other area of your expertise, and of course that is cybersecurity. And I wanted to ask you about how much artificial intelligence is changing the game when it comes to both defensive and offensive cybersecurity operations.
It's a game changer across both. First, it's always easier to be on attack than defense, right? An attacker has to find one way in. A defender has to be monitoring every virtual door and window. What we're seeing now on the attack side is more attackers leveraging it for spear phishing, very focused emails that get people to click on them that are often the first point of entry and compromise, making them more believable. We're seeing that on offense. I think we also can anticipate that we'll see more advanced attacks, multi-stage attacks that use AI to adjust as a defender tries to defend. And I'm concerned that one of the first areas we'll see that is in the burgeoning ransomware industry, where criminals, often in safe haven countries like Russia, try to attack companies that have insufficient defenses in order to force them to pay a ransom to get back their data or get back the operations of their network. On the defense side, AI can be a game changer in terms of actually helping identify misconfigurations in a network, making sense of firewall logs that are often hard to parse, and automating a lot of the manual work around cybersecurity. We're just seeing companies build in AI for defense. Google announced, they had used an AI capability to find a major vulnerability in one of their products and patch it. DARPA at the recent Hackers Conference announced the second phase as well of using AI to not only find but patch vulnerabilities. So the race is on. It'll advantage both. And I think the race is really on to see which one advances further.
Well, to put a finer point on this, Anne, you had a really fascinating piece in Foreign Affairs earlier this month, and I want to pull a quote from it. It's titled that China is winning the cyber war. And you write that China's cyber dominance extends well beyond telecommunications espionage, going on to say these intrusions show little evidence of traditional intelligence gathering. In your view, in your expertise, what is the biggest, most urgent action that the U.S. government could take right now to fend off these threats when it comes to competition with China?
Fundamentally, using AI for defense. So we're in a battle between democracies like the U.S. and authoritarian countries like China. In democracies, traditionally, governments haven't monitored the critical power, water, and pipelines that underpin American lives because they're privately owned. And traditionally, governments haven't monitored privately owned networks. In countries like China, not only are pipelines, water, and power companies often state-owned enterprises, but China has a great firewall where they monitor for both surveillance, obviously, of their citizens, but also for cyber attacks, and they can block those attacks in line. So the asymmetry between the models means that in the US, we are at a disadvantage. We need to use AI to find and fix the most critical vulnerabilities in our critical infrastructure that Americans rely on. AI gives us the way to pull that data together, simulate attacks, and make the investments most purposeful for the attacks that could actually disable large amounts of critical infrastructure. So that could work within our model in a partnership between government agencies like the Department of Energy, building digital replicas of our energy grid to model attacks, and then work with companies to fix the most critical vulnerabilities.